When you think of metaphors, you probably think of the term from English class, of a poetic device that allows you to equate one thing to another and create a comparison between the two. However, metaphors play a much larger role in our day-to-day lives in the ways that we communicate and act, so much so that we may not even know when we're using them. Our world is full of abstract concepts, and one way that we're able to understand these concepts and communicate our understanding to others is by structuring them using a metaphor. Take the concept of love. Love is something that's intangible and hard to physically pinpoint, so in Western culture, we've developed ways of thinking about love using different metaphors, depending on what we're trying to convey, such as love is a physical force, love is magic, love is madness, and love is war. The metaphor that someone uses to illustrate a concept highlights certain aspects of it and diminishes others. Another example of this is the metaphor an argument is war. In Western culture, we tend to think of an argument as a verbal battle, and the language we use when talking about arguments reflects this. For example, we use phrases like, "Your claims are indefensible," "He attacked every weak point in my argument," "His criticisms were right on target," "I demolished his argument," "I think I won the argument," "If you use that strategy, she'll wipe you out," and "He shot down all of my points." In examining expressions such as these, it is evident that we don't just talk about arguments in terms of war, we actually win or lose them. We see the person we are arguing with as an opponent. We attack his positions and we defend our own. We gain and lose ground. We plan and use strategies. If we find a position indefensible, we can abandon it and take a new line of attack. Many of the things we do in arguing are partially structured by the concept of war. Though there is no physical battle, there is a verbal battle, and the structure of an argument, attack, defense, counterattack, etc., reflects this. Thinking this way seems natural to us because it is an integral part of our culture. However, consider a culture in which an argument was conceived not as a battle, but as a dance. The participants could be seen as performers, and the goal could be to perform in a balanced and aesthetically pleasing way. In such a culture, people would view arguments differently, experience them differently, carry them out differently, and talk about them differently. We would probably not view them as arguing at all. They would simply be doing something different. So we use metaphors to think about and express concepts. So what? The reason why this is important is that, as mentioned previously, the metaphors that we use amplify certain aspects and hide others, which affects our thoughts and actions. The metaphors that we use have some basis in reality, otherwise we wouldn't use them. But how much of what is hidden in a metaphor could be important to us and help us live more fulfilled, meaningful lives? Indeed, there are exceptions to the ways that we structure our experience with metaphors. Bigger isn't always better, and arguments don't always have winners. But how much of the unhappiness we experience in life is due to an inconsistency between how we think about something and how it actually is? How could our lives be improved if we restructure not our actions, but how we think about the concepts underlying those actions? George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, the authors of Metaphors We Live By, use an anecdote to explain how a change in a metaphor could alter our perception of reality and create new meaning for us. An Iranian student who took a seminar about metaphors taught by Lakoff and Johnson kept hearing the expression, "the solution of my problems," and understood it as a beautifully sane metaphor. He took "the solution of my problems" to be a large volume of liquid bubbling and smoking, containing all of your problems, either dissolved or in the form of precipitates, with catalysts constantly dissolving some problems, for the time being, and precipitating out others. It gives us a view of problems as things that never disappear utterly, and that cannot be solved once and for all. All of your problems are always present, only they may be dissolved in solution, or they may be in solid form. The best you can hope for is to find a catalyst that will make one problem dissolve without making another one precipitate out. And since you do not have complete control over what goes into the solution, You are constantly finding old and new problems precipitating out and present problems dissolving, partly because of your efforts and partly despite anything you do. Structuring problems and solutions in terms of chemicals conveys the idea that problems are not the kind of thing that can be made to disappear forever. To treat them as things that can be solved once and for all is pointless. The reappearance of a problem is viewed as a natural occurrence rather than a failure on your part to find the right way to solve it. The culture that we live in tends to see problems as puzzles, which are solved through hard work and dedication, and have one solution that creates a sense of permanent finality. We tend to think about and structure our lives in this way, with our search for happiness as the solution to our problems. Many of us follow a tried and true, familiar path of life, going to school, getting a job, and retiring, with the hope that one day we will achieve permanent happiness and that all of our hard work in previous years will have been worth it for the moment when we have no more problems to solve. However, life is rarely so linear and predictable, and it can be very stressful and disheartening when our lives don't live up to this standard, or when our problems don't seem to have a single solution or any solution at all. If we think about problems not as puzzles to be solved, but as chemical compounds the way that the student did, we are no longer searching for the ultimate solution that brings satisfaction and happiness for the rest of our days. To live by the chemical metaphor would mean that your problems have a different kind of reality for you. A temporary solution would be an accomplishment rather than a failure. Problems would be part of the natural order of things rather than disorders to be cured. The way you would understand your everyday life and the way you would act in it would be different if you lived by the chemical metaphor. Truth is relative to understanding, which means that there is no absolute standpoint from which to obtain absolute objective truths about the world. This does not mean that there are no truths, it means only that truth is relative to our conceptual system, which is grounded in and constantly tested by our experiences and those of other members of our culture in our daily interactions with other people and with our physical and cultural environments. Accepting the inherent subjectivity of our human experience and truth itself may feel overwhelming, but it also allows for the freedom to craft your experience in a way that brings you the most joy and happiness. New York Times columnist David Brooks reminds us that to be aware of the central role metaphors play is to be aware of how imprecise our most important thinking is. It's to be aware of the constant need to question metaphors with data, to separate the living from the dead ones and the authentic metaphors that seek to illuminate the world from the tinny advertising and political metaphors that seek to manipulate us.